Today's video, a little bit dark, a whole lot sad. And if I'm gonna be honest, when I think about this and when I talk about it, it still makes me angry inside. We as pastors have egos. Our heads get big when our church starts to grow and the money starts to come in and we're asked to preach or to teach or to speak somewhere, maybe write something for somebody. And all of a sudden our egos and our heads inflate. Scripture says pride comes before the fall. There's a lot of good pastors out there who fell. You see, Satan knows our weaknesses, and those are the fiery darts that he's going to throw at you. There's pastors who, when their egos and their heads get swollen, they think, well, I'll just stick my toe in. I can flirt with disaster and walk away. I can dance with the devil and still be okay, but you can't. The problem is when pastors give in to that temptation and they find themselves in sin, it's a ripple effect. The damage that it does, long term, that it causes. Paul says to flee from sexual temptation. Now I apply that to all temptation. When you're tempted, you need to turn and burn. You need to get up on your toes and sprint as fast as you can. And while you're running away from that, you need to let people know. Your spouse, your church leaders, your accountability partner, your prayer warriors, let them know, hey, I'm running away from this. Pray for me, hold me accountable, walk and journey with me through this. These are stories of men that I know and the temptation that they fell into and the effects that it had. 20 years ago, there was a pastor who had an affair with a woman half his age. She was legal, but she was still a young girl. That just recently came to light. And even though it's 20 years ago that it happened, his marriage is destroyed. His relationship with his adult kids is wrecked. His ministry is over. And this young woman who's now grown and married with a family of her own, she's wrestling through that. Her marriage is on the rocks. All because a pastor was tempted and gave in. I knew another pastor, a pretty smart fella. Don't know why he did it, but he started plagiarizing sermons. And I'm not talking like, hey, that pastor had a good point, I'm going to borrow that, or I'm going to add this, or I'm going to steal this. No, he was preaching whole manuscripts, like downloading the sermon and just preaching it word for word. And he didn't even like go get Joe Blow from Small Town USA. He was getting like John Piper, MacArthur, Heibel. I mean, big name guys. And somebody sitting in his church one day thought, I've heard that sermon before. And they did a little homework. And sure enough, they found the sermon that he had preached word for word. And they started kind of doing a little research. And for months, this guy had been preaching plagiarized sermons. He was even preaching a whole sermon series and claiming them as his own. When the church leaders confronted him, instead of admitting to it, dealing with it, and figuring it out, he denied it to the point of lying about it. Cost him his ministry at that church. Not only did it cost him his ministry, he struggled to get back into ministry. He was out of ministry for several years because the story got out. People knew what happened. He had a daughter who was raised in the church but had left the faith, and he was trying to get her back in. And I often wondered, what did that do for her? A girl raised in the church, left the church, and then her dad fired because of plagiarism and lying. I don't know if that girl ever came back to the church or not. And if she didn't, I kind of wonder what this did, seeing her dad go through that and make those choices. Again, ripple effect of the choices that this pastor made. I knew another pastor. He wasn't serving in ministry at the time. He was a pew sitter in a church. And pride started to get into him, and some arrogance. And he convinced himself that I'm a better preacher than the pastor in the pulpit. I'm a better pastor than the man leading this church. And he got a group of people in the church to surround him, and they started to believe that. And they came up with this idea that they were going to overthrow the church. They were going to force the pastor to leave, and then they were just going to put this guy in as the pastor. Some church leaders got wind of that, and they stopped it. Those people left the church. That pastor, the denomination from the state office came and had to discipline that pastor. And what it did to that church, what it did to his marriage, and what it did as his kids watched that. And just, again, the ripple effect. And I talked to some people in that church as that was happening, and as that kind of unfolded, and I watched some people get really mad. And I watched some people leave the church. I'm from the world of youth ministry. And years ago, there was 3 full-time youth pastors in the county I was working in. And the one guy was younger, married, 3 little kids, newer to ministry, and started flirting with a girl, 16-year-old girl in his youth group. Started sending her text messages and emails and even handwritten letters that were really inappropriate. And that kind of escalated to the point he started sending pics of himself. When that broke, when the news got out, he was immediately arrested. His wife divorced him, took the kids and moved back to wherever she was from. The fallout from that, the town and the community was watching what happened with this youth pastor. And then they started to look at me and the other guy. And I will tell you, what saved us from a lot of judgment and speculation is the fact that we had established long-term ministries. We were both in youth ministry for well over 12 years. And we both had long-term ministries in that community. So our reputations helped to keep a lot of that at bay. But the decisions that youth pastor made, it rippled out, not just with his family and that young girl's family in the church, but into the community. And we saw our own youth ministries take a hit because red flags went up about, who's running youth ministries and can we really trust them? I had a friend of mine, known him for a long time, 20 plus years. Several years ago, it's 2 a.m. I get a phone call. I look, his name pops up. 2 a.m., it's an emergency. Of course, I answer the phone. Didn't take me long to realize this guy was drunk. So drunk, when I called him later the next day, he didn't even remember calling me at 2 a.m. I had no clue this guy had a problem with alcohol. His alcohol and his use and abuse of alcohol cost him his ministry. It damaged his marriage. It damaged the relationship he had with his own 2 teenage kids. He left the ministry. For years, he was out of the ministry. Now, the good part about that story is he got clean and sober. He's been clean and sober for years and years and years, and eventually he made his way back into ministry. But I tell you these stories because I want you to have eyes wide open. Temptation's gonna come your way. We all have weaknesses. We all have temptations. We all have those things that catch our eye. When temptation comes your way, you have to turn and flee. You have to surround yourself with people who will hold you accountable. I want eyes wide open so that you can run to the cross. Flee temptation and run to the cross. What I don't want to be telling these stories years from now and telling your story as well about how you fell, about the devastation and the outcome, about the ripple effects that happened in the church and the community because you fell into temptation. You made a poor choice. Eyes wide open, flee from temptation, run to the cross so that you can continue to do the ministry that Jesus Christ called you to do. I tell you these stories because I love you. I want what's best for you. I want you to be protected. Keep your eyes wide open.